Throughout history, warfare has been a brutal and destructive force, often marked by acts that go beyond the battlefield. In the ancient world, some of the most shocking acts of violence were committed under the guise of warfare, but their brutality would be classified as war crimes today. These actions left a lasting legacy, not only for the victims, but also for the societies that carried them out, setting precedents for how power and fear were wielded by ancient rulers. In this exploration of ancient war crimes, we will delve into some of the most notorious examples, where leaders and empires showed no mercy to those who opposed them. These are stories of total destruction, unimaginable torture, and ruthless domination. Alexander's devastation of Tyre. In the year 332 BCE, Alexander the Great was sweeping through the Persian Empire, conquering cities with a blend of military genius and sheer force. Tyre, a wealthy and fortified island city located off the coast of modern-day Lebanon, became one of Alexander's greatest challenges and one of his most shocking victories. Known as the Queen of the Seas, Tyre had stood strong for centuries, resisting sieges with its formidable walls and naval strength. But when its leaders refused to surrender to Alexander, they unknowingly sealed their fate. Alexander, determined to break Tyre's resistance, employed a strategy that shocked the ancient world. Unable to attack the city by sea, he ordered the construction of a massive causeway, essentially creating a land bridge to the island. This monumental engineering project took months to complete, with relentless attacks from both sides. But once the Macedonian forces reached the walls of Tyre, the full force of Alexander's wrath was unleashed. After breaching the city's defences, Alexander's army slaughtered over 6,000 Tyrians. The surviving men, approximately 2,000, were crucified along the shoreline as a brutal display of power. Historian Quintus Curtius Rufus, in his account of Alexander's campaigns, noted that these executions were not just acts of punishment, but deliberate symbols meant to terrify other cities into submission. The remaining 30,000 inhabitants, mostly women and children, were sold into slavery. The brutal sack of Carthage. Carthage, once a thriving hub of trade and culture on the coast of North Africa, had long been a rival to Rome. Over the course of the Punic Wars, the two powers clashed repeatedly for dominance in the Mediterranean. However, the Third Punic War, 149–146 BCE, marked the culmination of their rivalry in one of the most devastating war crimes in history. Rome, under the leadership of statesman Cato the Elder, decided that Carthage must be erased from existence, an event immortalized by the Latin phrase Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. After a brutal 3-year siege, the Romans breached Carthage's walls in 146 BCE. What followed was a systematic and horrific annihilation of the city. According to the ancient historian Polybius, Roman forces slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Carthaginian civilians. Of the estimated 700,000 people living in the city before the siege, only 50,000 survived, and they were enslaved and scattered across the Roman Empire. The Roman army then razed the city to the ground, ensuring that no trace of Carthage's former glory would remain. Polybius witnessed the aftermath and wrote that the destruction of Carthage was one of the most harrowing sights he had ever seen. Buildings were burned to ashes, and the streets were filled with the bodies of the dead. The ancient historian Appian also documented the Roman soldiers' cruelty in his book Roman History, describing how the city's final defenders, many of them unarmed civilians, were butchered without mercy. The Romans, in their zeal to erase Carthage, spared no one. Women, children, and the elderly were all killed. The utter destruction of Carthage was not just an act of war, but a deliberate attempt to erase an entire civilization. Unimaginable torture by Assyrian armies. If there is any empire known for its sheer brutality, it is the Assyrian Empire. From the 10th to the 7th centuries BCE, the Assyrians ruled over a vast portion of Mesopotamia, employing extreme violence not only as a means of conquest, but as a tool of psychological warfare. Their armies were feared across the ancient Near East, not just because of their military prowess, but because of their horrifying cruelty toward those they captured. The Assyrians were masters of terror. Their kings, including Ashur-Nisirpal II and Tiglath-Pileser III, proudly recorded their deeds in detailed inscriptions, describing how they tortured and mutilated their enemies. One of the most infamous methods they used was flaying, skinning their captives alive, and displaying the skins on the walls of the cities they had conquered. In some cases, they would impale prisoners on spikes and leave them to die in agony, a sight that would serve as a chilling warning to others who might resist. The historian Diodorus Siculus provides a vivid account of Assyrian cruelty in his Bibliotheca Historica, noting that they often cut off the limbs of their prisoners, leaving them to die slowly as a spectacle for their comrades. Cities that dared to rebel were subject to mass executions, with thousands of inhabitants beheaded or burned alive. Their reign of terror lasted for centuries, but in the end, it was this same cruelty that contributed to their downfall. The Assyrians made too many enemies, and by the 7th century BCE, a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians sacked the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, putting an end to their empire. Mass executions and biological warfare by the Mongols. Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire, which spanned much of Asia and parts of Europe, was notorious for its shocking brutality and mass executions. But the Mongols also engaged in early forms of biological warfare that were particularly horrifying. One of the most infamous examples occurred during the siege of the Crimean city of Kaffa in 1346 CE. This city, held by the Genoese, had resisted Mongol attacks for years, and the siege had reached a stalemate. It was during this time that the Mongols, led by a descendant of Genghis Khan, employed a terrifying new tactic, using diseased corpses as weapons. Many historians believe this event may have played a role in the outbreak of the Black Death, which would go on to kill millions across Europe and Asia. One of the most infamous episodes in Genghis Khan's conquests occurred in 1221 CE, when the Mongols captured the city of Nishapur in modern-day Iran. After a rebellion killed one of Genghis Khan's sons-in-law, the Mongol leader ordered that the entire population of the city be slaughtered. Persian historian Juvaini recounts how the Mongol soldiers killed every man, woman and child, with estimates of the death toll reaching 1.7 million. The sheer scale of the massacre shocked the medieval world, and Nishapur was left as little more than a pile of corpses. Genghis Khan and his generals, including his grandson Hulagu Khan, employed similar tactics across Central Asia, the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Cities that resisted the Mongols were often completely destroyed, their inhabitants either massacred or enslaved. In addition to their brutal military tactics, the Mongol conquests were also accompanied by widespread sexual exploitation. Genghis Khan himself fathered hundreds, if not thousands, of children during his campaigns, and this pattern of sexual violence was repeated by his generals and soldiers. Historian Juvaini, writing in the 13th century, noted that after the fall of cities like Nishapur and Merv, Mongol soldiers were allowed to take the surviving women as war prizes. Genghis Khan's personal role in this exploitation was significant. By some estimates, as many as 16 million people alive today are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. Ruthless raids and destruction by the Vikings. The Viking Age, spanning from the late 8th to the early 11th centuries, is often remembered for the Norsemen's seafaring raids across Europe. However, beneath their reputation as explorers and traders lies a darker history of ruthless raids and destruction. The Vikings were known for their brutality, particularly when attacking monasteries and settlements along the coasts of England, Ireland and France. One of the most shocking Viking raids occurred in 793 CE, when Norse warriors sacked the monastery of Lindisfarne in Northumbria, England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes the event as a great slaughter, noting that the invaders showed no mercy, killing monks, looting treasures, and setting fire to holy sites. This raid was only the beginning of a series of brutal Viking attacks that would terrorize Europe for centuries. Viking raids were characterized by their speed, surprise, and ferocity. In many cases, entire villages were wiped out, with survivors taken as slaves or left to fend for themselves in the ruins. The Vikings' raids were not just about acquiring wealth, they were about instilling fear and asserting dominance. The ancient world was a stage for some of the most horrifying war crimes ever recorded. Each episode of violence not only reshaped the geopolitical landscape of its time, but also left a legacy of suffering and terror that transcends centuries. These ancient acts of brutality remind us of the profound consequences of unchecked power and the depths of human cruelty. As we reflect on these dark chapters of history, it becomes clear that understanding such atrocities is crucial for recognizing the values of compassion, justice, and human dignity in our own times. If this exploration of ancient war crimes has captivated your interest, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the darker aspects of history and other fascinating topics that reveal the complexities of our shared past.